let's move on to the movie itself. This is something, we're like 50 minutes into this discussion. The movie itself, when the film came out on October 27th, 2017, I was in there. I'm sure you were as well, for the very first premiere, that Thursday evening premiere in a IMAX theater, because this is the very first Saw film that got an IMAX release. And I appreciated that. One of the problems I had, I don't know if it was just my theater or the sound quality for the movie in particular, but I did have a hard time, at least in that experience, hearing it. Not in any other experience, home or theater-related experience, hearing any of it, but just that one. It kind of made me mad. It's like, oh, what are they saying? Like, everyone's screaming and I can't hear exactly what they're saying, especially when they were trying to, they're being lifted up and hung from the metal chains around their neck as they're trying to figure out, like, which syringe to stick her with. So, that was something, at least my initial reaction to it is like, I had a hard time hearing it. I think it was the theater I was at, not really the film itself. But generally, I enjoyed it the first time I saw it. I've done reviews on it. That's my initial thoughts. This is just going to be, months after the fact. What were your initial thoughts to the film?
Well, sticking with that theater experience, yeah, I went to the film in just my local theater down the road that was playing it at midnight. There was about 16 to 17 people in that theater on a Thursday night. So then again, I'm from like rural Missouri, but at the same time, but for 16 people, so I was kind of like somewhat worried. Where I was like, okay, 16 people, we'll see how it does opening weekend, but we'll talk more about that in the box office. But initial thoughts on the film, I liked it. Like I said, I liked the characters. Like the games itself. I thought it was better than half the sequels. But at the same time, I did have there were some issues. Like I said, going back, the lighting was different. It looked different at times. First two traps were like meh, okay. And it took a while to get things picked up and feel like a Saw movie, and for me at points, but maybe it's just because we're introduced to new characters, a new arc. It takes a while for you to get grasp and join follow these characters. But once I got to like the halfway point of the film and they're starting to do some callbacks to the original Saw franchise, I thought, okay, I'm back with this franchise now. And then I felt right at home when Tobin appeared as Jigsaw. That's when I felt, okay, now I'm on 100% totally into this movie now, believing it is now part of a Saw canon officially now that I see Tobin on screen and stuff like that. But all in all, like I said, I enjoyed this movie. It does have its problems, and we'll talk about that as we review the movie itself. But, all in all, I enjoyed it for a Saw movie. It felt like, right in the middle. And kind of going back to our last video, the perfect summary I had for this movie right here kind of felt like, the Force Awakens where of this movie. It kind of felt like, it's back to playing it safe. You got the traps, you got the story, you got the characters, you got the twist ending. But I felt like, they played it safe in some areas, but it was just introducing the right amount of nostalgia factors in it and enough to keep me invested in the story and enough for me to be interested in a sequel. So that was my initial thoughts.
Yeah, like I really felt like at the end of the day, from the very first viewing as a Saw fan, and it's weird because I feel like it has divided the Saw fans. People in the comment section, all through the internet I've seen, there's just a very divisive attitude for this film. Oh, it ruined the franchise. Oh, it was an awesome redo of the franchise, the best one yet. I feel like it was, midline. It was down like probably the fourth, fifth best, depending on the mood of the day. And that's fine. Like, I wasn't expecting this movie to be the best one of the entire franchise. Now, the interesting thing here is upon repeat viewings, especially for anyone who hasn't already gone out and bought this film for your home release, go out and do that and listen to the commentaries we'll get into later, because I really think that this is something that everyone needs to remember. This was a reintroduction, really a very much a reboot, soft reboot of the entire franchise. They had to introduce all these characters. And honestly, the thing that makes me the most excited, and probably more sentimental to this film than the other 7 films in this entire franchise is the mere fact that we have the writers, the actors, the producers, and all these other people who are very closely watching the success of this movie, both in the box office, the home release, and everything that kind of resharpens the brand of the Saw brand. Everything that resharpens the Saw brand into parlaying this into a 9th film, maybe a 10th film, maybe 11th film, something like that. And forever into the future, whatever. You cannot kill a horror franchise. And partially, given the fact that we have this outlet where, you and I can do this, we talk about these things for hours on end, break it down, talk about it, literally the inception that we'd heard of, the inception of this movie, through the movie, the box office, the home release, the future of the franchise, everything. We have this platform. It's better than the platform that we had back in 2004 to 2010 with House of Jigsaw and all these other outlets that we had to talk to each other. It makes me excited. And knowing that the people are in this movie who are passionate and want to see it continue in the best way possible, it makes me feel like this movie is probably one of my favorite ones, really. Because and I want to kind of jump into the characters and the story and all this other stuff. Obviously, like you said, it has its problems. There's these ideas that don't really pan out. As you said earlier, there's these scenes where we're really outside. We're trying to explore this world a little bit. The tone is a little bit different from the other 7 films. It's a lot brighter. The flashbacks are handled in weird ways. We still have that classic Saw flashback within a flashback. Tone, that story structure that's been there since the very beginning, and that's fine. But taking all that away, all the bad things, at least for now, I'm excited because the heads of this franchise going forward, and to kind of name them in particular, I walked away all 4 times I've seen this thinking, Hannah Emily Anderson, I cannot wait to see what they do with Eleanor's character. I think she's the absolute standout of the film. But every single time I watch it previously, I get more and more passionate about Matt Passmore's character, especially after listening to the audio commentary with the producers and also the documentary that was put on the home release, saying just how passionate he is about this particular character of his, Logan's character. And I'm wondering, really, and I want to ask you, do you think that Passmore is going to be a decent passing of the torch if Tobin Bell ever decides not to come back, or for God forbid he can't come back for one reason or another? Can the series survive without John? Because I'm not sure at this point, but every time I rewatch this film, I have more and more hope.
I will praise Matt Passmore. I thought he did a good job in this movie. There are times, where he's trying to play up the part a little bit, but then again, you look back, he would do that just because he is trying to not expose himself as the killer. But, I see hopeful when I see his character. He's got some charm to him. He's got some personality. He's not one-noted. Even the part where the reveal at the end, where I thought the Sperry Brothers did a good job, just the way they filmed him, the way they hit him in the shadows, the way they had close-ups on his face and his eyes, and he can be menacing when he needs to be. So I think there is a potential in him to play this villainous character and taking over the Jigsaw reign, as well as doing his own version and own take of it. And like I said, he is very passionate. He does do all the little things, like all the little subtle details of Logan's character having PTSD, all the subtle details of Logan being a father, all these details of Logan, being the secret killer, trying to be manipulative and stuff like that. So he does bring like a wide range aspect to his character, as well as a psychological side of him, and it got to the point right there where I was talking to a fan that said there would be, because of his character, there would be no Jigsaw without Logan, if you really want to think about it. And it made sense because, as we talk about, we'll go into the more details when we talk about the spoiler at the ending of this movie. But bottom line, there would be no Jigsaw without Logan. What I mean by that is, there's a thing in the end where that line where John tells Logan, we can never come from anger nor vengeance. You taught me that. That was one of the lessons that John carried out throughout the past Saw sequels. The lesson he was trying to teach Hoffman. The lesson he was trying to teach Amanda. You can't be personal. You can't show your emotions. You got to keep them in check. And for John to flat out say, you taught me that. That's a big deal. That is a big deal. And then Logan said, together we build a legacy. And because it wasn't for that moment with Logan's character, then that really puts the whole nudge into John Kramer's character from the sequels.
I agree with that, because when you take it into context with Saw 4, the whole Cecil trap, that's him. The most early chronological traps we have for the series are the Cecil trap and the barn trap, right? I mean, obviously there's something there that would establish another trap in between that and Seth Baxter, maybe the Farn trap, another trap in Seth Baxter, because you need something there to make it that Hoffman would understand what the Billy puppet is. That's always been something that gets me. It's one of the biggest plot holes in the series. And obviously the barn doesn't really shore up that entire inconsistency, because they never found the barn. They would not know what Billy is at that point. But it remains that John has had this vengeance part of him with the barn trap and Cecil, and then Logan's character is someone who really teaches him the value of being who he needs to be, like how he needs to promote and build his own legacy. And I agree with you, even though this was kind of devoid of Tobin Bell a whole lot, you get that character moment, you get even that one line, which I will say, I just have to say, I believe, and I'm going to attribute that to Tobin Bell and not anyone else. It just feels to me like that's something that Tobin Bell came up with, and not the producers, the writers, or anyone else. But I'll eat my words if someone comes out and says, no, actually, I thought of that. But it really feels like that little line puts that whole movie in context and makes this movie, in retrospect and in hindsight, going back and rewatching it, way more of a John-centric film than we've had in a really long time. At least more so than Saw 3D, maybe more so than Saw 5. Saw 6 obviously is a much more John-centric film, but probably Saw 6 and Saw 4, and then this one is John-centric.
And it's good to see that, all those little subtle things where they just reference the other films in their own way, which is one of the reasons I like this movie. It does have callbacks without even mentioning. The sequels only got one mention in this entire movie, and that was the Jill Tuck reference. That was it. That was the only callback to the other thing. No mention of Dr. Gordon, no mention of Hoffman, no mention of Amanda, no mention of any of the past characters or victims, other than maybe that throwaway line where Logan told Eleanor, no, John Kramer's victims died in this trap, but that was it. So, and there are ways to talk about it, such as, the way shots were filmed, the way victims were presented, the way tapes and stuff are mentioned on there. So this film did have its callbacks and its own to other films. But it was good to see them move on to the lines and progressing forward and taking a new direction with the sequel, as well as with its characters.
Could you tell us a little bit more, because I already kind of shared my thoughts and opinions on it before we move on. What were your thoughts on Eleanor, Hannah Emily Anderson? I really thought, and I just want to really, really re-emphasize this, that I think she's an amazing standout for this film. Menacing, interesting. Her whole connection with the dark web, I think, is something that they need to explore in further sequels. I think that's, at least in my opinion, the most intriguing thing that this movie ever really got into.
I thought she did a good job. It was interesting. The producers revealed that she was one of the last people they casted. Just like Emily Anderson was. I think maybe they were hinting maybe it was like either Brittany Allen or Laura Vandervoort coming in for that character, but they said, no, we want to be in the Saw Trap. So Emily Anderson was one of the last people they said that they casted for this film. I thought she did a really good job. There was enough, intriguement there where they give subtle hints of what her character actually is and what her motivations are and stuff like that, where they provide just enough subtlety and enough intrigue where we didn't know. Now, even that she does such a good job to the point where I was convinced it was her. Like our first video we did, if you go back and listen to it, our theory predictions, and I just want to state for the record, yes, I did get the barn twist prediction right, so that's a feather in my cap. But I just happened to pick the wrong coroner. So, but she did such a good job. Where just by looking at the trailer, I was convinced that it was her, and just the way the delivery and that subtlety, where I bought the fact that is she afraid or is she just and fascinated by John's character and John's work just by that one subtle line of it's Jigsaw. And like I can't praise Emily Anderson enough, and she did a really good job. And even on Twitter, I made a deal with her saying, no, hey, next time you do a Saw movie, I'm going to go dress up as Eleanor when I go see it. And so if she's listening to this, yes, Hannah, I do tend to hold up my end of the bargain. I will go ahead and I'll dress up. I'll get a sleeve tattoo. Not a real one, of course, but and go watch the Saw 9 or Jigsaw 2, whatever they call the next one. So, but all in all, I was really impressed with their character, and I like the subtle hints, and she has me intrigued. And Josh, if you're listening, please do not kill her off.
I hardly think that they're going to. I mean, we're not gonna ever say that we know better than them, but I don't think that they're going to. The one I want to just kind of go down the last bits of the cast that I really feel like is worth talking about. Clay Bennett. Now, this is interesting because the very first time I watched the movie, I didn't think too much of him, but the way that the movie set him up, I think out of the main people from this movie, he's definitely going to be the one person that kind of goes over. I can imagine them building up the brotherhood, the friendship between Detective Hunt and Logan's character in any future sequels. And in fact, if that's the direction they want to keep with this police procedural, I'm actually excited to see what they might do in the future movie with Passmore, Clay Bennett, and Hannah Emily Anderson. Because those people, without Holleran, without him in the middle, kind of determining what's going on. Maybe they're hunting after him after the end of this movie. We're not sure. The banter between them, I think they can create an interesting dynamic that is somewhat opposed, but also similar and kind of a callback to the John, Amanda, and Hoffman relationship from the original trilogy and the original series, just on the opposite end. These are the people in the police, and even though Passmore's character is the new Jigsaw, and maybe, just throwing it out there because we have no idea, maybe Eleanor's character becomes involved at some level, but Detective Hunt is still kind of ambiguous to everything going on. He might even think it's still Holleran. I can imagine that being an interesting character dynamic for any future series, and I'm really glad that they have these three people who are probably, if they do a direct sequel to Jigsaw, will shepherd the franchise.
I imagine they will too, and that's one of the things where in our first video we discussed that I was wanting to see. I want to see camaraderie. I want to see a history with these characters. Like they flat out established, even with a short dialogue. Like the first scene, we see all three of them in the room together with Holloran. There's like first dialogue is it's like, hey Keith, hey, what's going on, Doug? Good to see you. It's like, where you been? You now joined Homicide? Cool. And he goes, it's like, hey, I'm sorry about your wife and stuff like that. How you doing? And we immediately establish, okay, we know these two characters know each other. We know they got history. Hunt was in the service with Logan when they were in Fallujah. We know Logan and Eleanor's history. They're bouncing off witty comebacks, like, how's it look, El? It's like, oh, he's just a little pale and stuff like that. So you can tell, these characters know each other, and you can tell there's a friendship and there's camaraderie and there's professionalism with them. And that's one of the things we didn't get with the other Saw sequels with the cops, other than Saw 2 and 3, but that was it. But it was good to see that, they established a character background for these characters, and there's a setting and place and history with them, and they can use and work off whatever directions they go with the sequel. They can choose to go one way or the other with it, and it would make sense because they've already established that timeline and setting for them.
I agree. I would really like for them to focus on that if they're going to. If they have to focus on it in any future sequels, it would be my I wouldn't want them to give up these actors or these characters, because it would be interesting to see where they can go from there, especially with the way that Jigsaw ends that film. We'll get to that later, but I do have my problems with the way that they ended it. But the last thing I want to talk about here is some of the traps, and also some of the actors in the traps, Laura Vandervoort and the rest of them.
All right, so the actors we have, there's basically four. We're not going to count Matt Passmore, so we're just going to go ahead and move on to the four. Laura Vandervoort, Mandela Van Peebles, Brittany Allen, and Paul Bronstein as Anna, Mitch, Carly, and Ryan.
Yes.
And those are the four actors in the traps this year. And essentially they were the B story this year. They were the ones that we had to follow through the traps, where I guess you can argue either one of them. They're the A story, and this police procedural is the B story. But essentially, I'm going to say they're the B story. This is just my opinion. I think they're the B story, the traps. I thought they all did a good job, and what was really smart, in my opinion, they essentially didn't reveal what each person did. It was kind of like a callback to Saw 5, where you have 5 people in traps, and they figure out, what they all did. But they had a really cool twist this time, where I like the idea where they have to confess. And we're just going to accept the fact, as we do in every Saw film, John Kramer knows everything. You just don't. John Kramer just knows everything, and that's just the only Saw logic that we have. It's like, how does John know this? How did John know this about that person? Just accept the fact that John Kramer knows everything, and it's all okay. But it goes to the fact where I like the idea that they have to confess, and I liked how all of them, had kind of hid the truth. Like, Mitch kind of was the most honest at first, but he didn't tell the whole truth about the break lines. Anna was kind of like, hiding her confession, which if we flat out knew her story right off the bat, what she did, killing her baby, boom, no sympathy for her through that movie whatsoever, if we knew that. So, but I'm kind of glad they kind of hit that from us, and you could see, Ryan's the kind of guy, same way, he's the comedic side and stuff like that. Carly, just made them look. But I want to go back to the beginning where we first see them, and this is credit to the actors, and they mentioned this in the producer's commentary, where they said that when they're first introduced, they all got the buckets in their head, and you're wondering why they got to do that. You can flat out see the personalities of each character and each actor of what they have just without even seeing their faces. Like, just by watching that trap, Anna's the one commonly thinking, what's going on? Why am I here? Ryan's the guy that immediately freaks out, it's pushing and shoving, being violent. Mandela Van Peebles is kind of the guy where he's kind of like street cred, saying, what is this? What's going on here? And then Carly's the one, she'll just go in complete, panic mode. And even Laura Vandervoort said that in one of the DVD extras, where it turns, if you have 2 or 3 people shouting out loud, then it turns into a shouting match. You don't want a shouting match. So each person's characteristic is different. Anna's the calm one. Ryan's like the quick whippersnapper, smart aleck thing. Carly's the one where she'll freak out over the littlest things. Mitch is the kind of guy where he kind of plays it cool at times, but then he'll lose it whenever things don't go his way and stuff like that. So it was kind of cool, that little transition each characters. And I thought all the actors did a good job. Like I said, as far as Paul Bronstein's character goes, I actually thought, out of all the traps, probably next to Lee Wanell. He's probably one of the most comedic characters we've had in the Saw movies. Lee Wanell, probably the first one, but I thought he was better than Greg Burke as Malik in Saw 5. I thought he did a much better job as that goes. I liked Anna. I thought she did a really good job. Laura Vandervoort's, tremendous actress. I thought her delivery was good. I thought she conducted herself pretty well, and she was very smart how she delivered her lines and stuff like that. Mandela Peebles did a really good job. I thought he tried to play it cool and kind of act like the little kid of the group, where he knew all the basic stuffs and trying to do all the heavy lifting and try to listen to reason and stuff like that. And for the short time Brittany Allen got, I thought she did okay with what she was given. She only lasts 15 minutes into the movie, then boom, she's dead. I was like, oh well. But at least the time she was given, I thought she made it work, though.
I'll just start with the least and go to the most. Brittany Allen, she didn't get a whole lot. And I feel like the problem with her character really is, because she didn't get a whole lot, and because her trap was set up the way that was, I honestly feel like that was a little bit of a cheat. It allowed the audience really to look at those syringes that were going to be stuck into her and know what the answer was without anyone making any decisions. And even the producers in the producers' commentary kind of commented on this and said, yeah, because she says, and then it's kind of a little hard to realize, like, why wasn't she making a decision? And like you said, it's just part of her character. She's unwilling to. She's so freaked out by the proceedings that she can't calm down and she can't think rationally, even though the rational explanation is right there. Because, like you said, the whole concept of this trap is just to confess. And she knew what she was looking for. She knew what she was looking at. And yet she couldn't make that decision because it was scary to her. She didn't know the outcome of any of the situations, and she couldn't think logically. I think that comes across really well, but as an audience member watching for the first, second, third, fourth time, I just always think it's a little bit of a cheat, honestly, because it would have been nice not really knowing the answer, but considering how all three had different numbers and one was so vastly different from the others, maybe we could have just assumed, or they didn't even have to say, because they had the visual of her stealing that much money. Yes, it's quick, like you said earlier. These very fast shots of the flashbacks, and we might not have been able to see that, but maybe on repeat viewings, you would have been able to figure out exactly which syringe would have been the one to save her. I would have rather them keep it at that. But as far as how she was portrayed and what she did for the film, I think that she did a fairly good job. I mean, you can't really expect a whole lot from someone who didn't really encompass a whole lot of the runtime, but still had a memorable part in a movie where essentially she's working off of three other people that have a lot more character to develop than she does. And like I said, none of that's really her fault or anyone's fault. It's just the way the Saw films are. You have a group of people go through all these traps. There's very little to actually go on when you're going to be the first one out, Then Mandela Van Peebles, he, to me, this is the thing that I think makes me the maddest about his trap. Not necessarily his character, is how they related what he did in his confession to John's character and John's family. Now, as a fan of the franchise, I love that. And I wish that they had done it through this entire trap, related every single person who John was testing here to his life. Because three of them are related to him or something about his life in general. You got Mitch with his nephew. You got Anna being his neighbor, and he knows that she took out the baby. Like you said, that's something that we wouldn't have been able to forgive. And then you also got Logan, who his confession was that he screwed up the whole X-ray thing. Three of these people related to him. No indication whether or not Ryan or
Carly.
Yeah, no indication about whether Ryan or Carly's character had any relation to John whatsoever. And like you said, yes, we can assume and anticipate John having this kind of godlike knowledge about everyone's transgressions, and he's going to test them for it. But if the whole process of this movie was to introduce a more immature John, a more immature Jigsaw, who's not given up this endless crusade to test people who have wronged him, and that was why they introduced Logan, I would like maybe retconned in some of the other movies, like an explanation of who those people are, Ryan and Carly's character, and how they affected John, and how he was actually testing them because they had wronged him or someone related to him in the past, when every other person in this trap was someone who had done that. And that's really like my only major deal with Peebles' character. I really liked him for the most part. I felt like he was an interesting choice for the role, considering his past pedigree and stuff that he's actually been a part of. I'm glad that they were on here, and I gotta admit, they tricked me, man. I thought he was gonna be one of the last people in this trap, in the traps. I didn't think, even after watching that trailer, when he's in the spiralerizer or whatever they want to call it, I didn't think he was going to die from that. I thought, okay, yeah, he's going to get past this and he's going to be one of the last people here. They tricked me there. And, Laura Vandervoort, I think, did a really, really good job, too. She was one of my most anticipated people in this movie. I'm glad they put her in a trap. I think she did really well there. The whole grain silo thing, I think, even as wacky as it is, was probably one of the standouts for not only this movie, but the series as a whole. It's memorable. When you get Paul Bronston, like, what he's doing, and the very fact that he has to kind of take out his leg in order to save them, it just worked in so many levels, and it's a memorable trap. Paul Bronston, though, I think steals this trap. Steals everything about this B-plot setup, where he's the funny guy, he lasts the longest, he's probably the person here I most sympathize with, because he's kind of, more like the audience, someone who's kind of talking, someone who sees the error in their ways for the most part, sees the logic in John's trap, this is the key to your freedom, all this other stuff that happens. And by the time it was all over, I have to admit, I felt so bad for his character, to the point where you get to see Logan, he uncovers Ryan and Anna's character, and you're like, oh man, they didn't make it. Obviously they didn't make it, but they've just been sitting here rotting away. And I really felt like at least Ryan's character might have learned what he did wrong, and then he was just kind of screwed over by that whole shotgun trap. But as a whole, I think the traps are really well done in this movie. They move along in a really interesting, nice pace, and I don't think they hold up the story for any real degree of time. And for the most part, they're memorable.
I think so too. Some people were saying, why are these traps not the most violent traps and stuff like that in the story? I think it would make sense from a storyline perspective why these traps wouldn't be so, vile and stuff like that. Because this essentially, if we're trying to connect the storyline, now granted, this whole entire series' timeline is so convoluted, it'll just give you a headache if you try to put everything in order. But I like the fact, essentially this trap is going to be John's first game. This is his first official full game with multiple people, is what, if we're trying to put this in the right timeline. So of course these traps wouldn't be as violent. Of course, there would be some flaws in them and stuff like that. But it made sense, and I like the way that if you look at the DVD extras and they saw that how this whole entire setting was in one barn. I liked how each barn had a purpose for the actual setting. Like, the loading docks, when they first wake up with the bucket heads, that's the loading docks, and then they open it up, and then they're in the main way of the barn, and then they go into the next loading docks right next to the silo, and after the silo they move on to another area of the barn, and then of course it's still taking place in the barn. And Ryan's trap, they were in a milking room. That's where essentially the final trap takes place, is in the milking portion of the barn. Mm-hmm. So I like the way the setups. Some of the traps, you just shake your head on. Some people are like, what, that's it? All you gotta do is cut yourself in the saw trap? Or what, just a needle injection and a hanging? Come on, you can give us more than that. But the spiralizer, I was impressed with it, the way it was made and stuff like that. And even though it wasn't as brutal as the other Saw films, they all had a story behind them, and they all had a purpose. And that's why I kind of like, even the simplest one, like the shotgun, that's a callback to Saw 1, that trap. The two people in a room with one gun, that takes you back to Saw 1. That gives John the idea for a Saw 1 trap down the line, maybe. Just two people chained up in a room, trying to figure out a way to get out with just one little thing. That's the only way out. So I enjoyed the traps in this one.
At least for Detective Halloran's character, what did you think of it?
Yeah, at first, I like calling Keith Rennie. He brings a lot of charm to the role, but sometimes he kind of plays like a one-noted dick, in my opinion, in this film. They admit in the commentary they let Colin Keith Rennie ad-lib a lot of lines, as well as they did Laura Vandervoort. She ad-libbed the line "Good luck, lollipop" to Ryan, which I thought that was a great ad-lib line. Some of the lines, you could tell actors are just ad-libbing and throwing stuff in where it may not have been entirely written, but just worked on their take. Because, actors, they always get 10 or 12 takes of the same line and bring different values, and they try different ways. But there's some ways that work. Half of Halloran's ad-lib lines just, in my opinion, don't work. The whole line where I kind of shake my head, where he goes, all right, we got to go through a list of Edgar Munson's known associates. This is not going to end well. Hungry?
They even talked about that. The producers talked about that in the commentary, and they're like, "Oh, it just works so well because he's just that kind of a brutal guy." I kind of get that. I get where they were coming from there. I agree, though. It doesn't really work as much as I'd want it to.
And then another line, like for instance, like what do you think of Eleanor? She's got a great ass. And then boom, it cuts to Paul Brown singing the Wire Trap. I'm like, he just talked about Hannah Anderson's butt, and we go right to the trap. And I'm like, yeah, it doesn't quite work. Or a good example of ad lib lines, Lord Vanderbort's delivery of Good Luck Lollipop, and of course Tobin's line, like Paul's just like, Ryan's just sitting there like, John, please let me go, I'll do anything you want. And John's just sitting there like, did you know that pigs are actually highly compassionate animals? Just stuff like that, that delivery works because Tobin's a great actor and he can pull stuff like that off. So, but all in all, as far as Halloran, he was all right. Sure, he's a lot better than Gibson. He was, if I can describe him, he's kind of like a cross between Gibson and Eric Matthews in a way, where he's kind of like the chain smoking, beat cop, where he has like a short temper when he comes to things and stuff like that. As Logan says in the dialogue with Eleanor at the bar, where they talk about the story where he loses his cool and beats up a child pedophile, and then because of that he was able to get off, and then a day later he kills a bunch of kids, and he's just like can't handle himself and stuff like that, and that's why Keith was there to investigate him for IA. So his character made sense, and the build up to the end of the trap, which him in a laser trap, and we'll go into more of that when we get to the end of the movie. But all in all, I thought he did a good job. He was kind of being charming. Some of his delivery lines worked, some of them didn't, in my opinion. But all in all, they made it to where, a lot of people thought, maybe he was the red herring. I knew from the start, I knew it wasn't going to be him because, like I said, we talked about in our first video that he was just there to be the red herring. And it made sense, and that's essentially what he was to the audience throughout the most of the movie. He was the red herring. And he, at the end of the day, he was just a beat cop, which I got to say this, for instance, with the whole police procedure. It's the police force in this Jigsaw universe in Gotham City. Because holy cow, all the cops are just ridiculous, and all these corruption and idiotic decisions. You got Matthews, Halloran, Rigg, all these guys. This is just getting ridiculous at this point, where these cops are just so corrupted and stuff like that. They have to be in Gotham City. So that's just my opinion.
They did try to make it seem like he was the antagonist. He was the new Jigsaw, like you said. He felt like too much of something we had seen before to actually feel like a legitimate threat or someone who was really the next Jigsaw, which I think is one of the things that kind of takes that character back for me, at least, is, like you said, he kind of feels like more of the Eric Matthews, kind of mixed in with Hoffman, kind of mixed in with Gibson, and it's just like this weird mixture of like that type of character where, yes, trying to be funny, like, oh, you want to grab something to eat, but also incredibly serious and someone who's been on the case forever, it's just like, yeah, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Like, he feels like this person who, okay, this is what he should have been. I'm not saying that this would have worked. I don't know. But it would have been kind of cool to bring in someone like Detective Fisk or someone. Just that one little calling card from the last one. He's like, this guy's been around. Like, when they sit there and go, okay, Jigsaw's back. He's like, not this again. I won't have it. But also really skeptical, and also doesn't know who to trust because of all the stuff with Hoffman. Someone we knew. That would have been a perfect point for that character, where you're wondering, this guy is someone that we recognize from the original franchise. Maybe it's going to be this person, but obviously it's not, because they wouldn't go in that direction otherwise. That, to me, would have been cool. They obviously couldn't have done that. The original series didn't end with anyone really left besides Fisk, and I don't think they're going to bring him back. Something I would have done. But just in general, I do like Halloran's character for the most part. I think he serves his purpose, which I guess you could say about any character, but I have nothing really terrible to say about him. I think he did a decent job with what he had, with the idea if you're just a general moviegoer, maybe you might have thought that he was the Jigsaw killer. but obviously if you're a major fan or just know anything about the way movies are structured, at the moment they go, it is him, and everyone starts focusing on him, it's not him, but that really but I think his main moment to shine, and also something I think is going to make him important for the future of the franchise, to the point where I actually wouldn't mind to have him back, is the ending, the last trap, which, before we get into that though, I have to say, and I want your opinion as well, the last trap, this kind of foray into the science fiction laser cutter, like collar trap thing, I have to say, the first time I saw it in the trailer, I was a little skeptical. I didn't really want it. I know a lot of people were like, oh man, like, is this really the direction we're going here? Like, these laser traps, this isn't going to work. But I think they did a pretty good job. They set it up very early in the film to make us understand the logic behind it, and then they put it in a trap. It was kind of clever, and it was, for the most part, like most Saw fans want, it was pretty brutal. I mean, I think that was a weird, interesting, like, squid-like at the very end trap that I think people could get behind. But what are your thoughts on it?
Well, I can tell you the guy right behind me loved it. Like, he was going out theaters, like, he paid like $30 for it. I was like, I'll tell you what, that trap alone, ending alone, was worth the price of admission, because that was a good, hard death. And I agree, it was the most violent death in the film, I think, as far as trap qualities go. It made sense, like building up around Logan's character, him a doctor, Eleanor using the lasers early on to get the bucket and stuff like that. And it made sense what the story they were trying to tell, where it was a good thing where it's something where Logan could be familiar with, it's a trick Halloran and stuff like that, and the way the ending was presented and the reveal at the end. And I didn't buy it for a second. Like I said, it was good enough where, you saw Logan's death, where they if you saw it, you felt, oh, that's kind of underwhelming, and then you realize, oh, it's part of the twist, and then the payoff at the end where you actually see his death. I thought that was actually really clever. So I was impressed with Laser Trap.
I liked it, but I have to say, and this just gnaws at me. If there's one thing about this movie's story that doesn't add up in the very end, it's literally the very end. It's the fact that Logan kills Halloran in the barn while letting Eleanor go to be his alibi, to indicate that Detective Halloran is in fact the Jigsaw killer, but he kills Halloran in the barn that Eleanor knows about, who she's running away and obviously going to tell people where the barn is. How is he going to clean up Halloran's mess? I mean, it's a unbelievably brutal trap. He locks him in there as if he's going to leave him there, but obviously because Eleanor is already out there, she's going to tell people. Like, we went to this old barn that was owned by Jill Tuck's family. That's where a trap was. It is a legitimate Jigsaw trap. That's where all this stuff was happening. We got to go back there because I don't know what happened to Logan. And even if I do know what happened to Logan, that's obviously the very first place you're going to start when you're trying to look for Detective Halloran, and they're going to find his dead body, or at least remnants of the DNA from places. I mean, this universe really did well to establish that you could find trace amounts of DNA that perfectly match up to a 10-year-old dead man. That room is ruined with blood and guts and everything. I just don't understand the logic behind it. I know it made for an awesome Saw trap, but I'm wondering if they're going to either ignore it or try to do leaps and bounds of logic in order to explain why they never went to the barn or how he covered this up, because it kind of seems like he shot himself in the foot.
Well, if you want a way out of it, I guess blow up the barn. I guess that's my only explanation. Blow it up and just have Logan go AWOL. I guess that's the only way you can fix that, I guess, logic. But yeah, you can go back, look at it. We'll talk about it when we get to the end, though. If you really want to nitpick, there's like a lot of things wrong with Logan's plan. And basically, the whole plot of this movie is just so convoluted, where each character has to do the exact same thing, because it's all just based on coincidence. So if you really want, that's why I promise, if you really want to nitpick this movie, you'll have a field day. There's tons of problems you can nitpick if you really wanted to. Me, on the other hand, I don't really like doing that with movies unless, the plot really does make me mad. But this one didn't make me as mad or as frustrated. Does it make sense in the long run if you're trying to build it up? Probably not. And like I said, you could probably come up with like 10 things wrong with Logan's plan. Like there's, if you can go like on softfreaks.com, there's like a list. There's like 20 things wrong with Logan's plan and why it doesn't make sense. And number one, like, Holloway's body. Number two, they should have found this barn in Saw 4 because obviously they were questioning Jill so much and going all around stuff like that. So if you really want to nitpick problems with this movie, there are some, and such as, why did nobody notice John Kramer's grave being dug up, or like just little things like that, which, as a screenwriters and story writers, you're going to have problems with films. Like even some of the greatest movies, have some of the biggest plot holes and flaws. Like I remember Big Bang Theory brought up something like, episode Big Bang Theory brought up the whole entire Indiana Jones Raiders of the Lost Ark plot, which if you think about it, like it makes total sense. Why was the purpose of Indiana Jones this movie if the Nazis were going to get the Ark of the Covenant anyways? And open it up.
And then open it up and kill themselves, and yeah.
But yeah, that's the point I'm trying to prove here. Like, there's gonna be plot holes in movies, and it's gonna be curious to see how the writers, answer this one or explain it. And I'm sure maybe they have a plan, or I'm sure they're getting feedback now, and they're trying to think, oh well. That's usually one thing Saul usually does well when they're trying to fix things. Like they listen to fans and they see feedbacks, and they're trying to, if they want to make an attempt to fix things, they're gonna try to make an attempt to fix it. But we're gonna see if they have a plan and go through that. So that's just my thoughts on that plan right there as far as any plot holes are concerned.
For my part, like you were saying, I think that the ending is all over the place. I mean, the whole Halloran thing, Logan's plan being a little bit AWOL. I mean, like this guy has some mental problems, and obviously the police force in this universe is either really corrupt or terrible at their jobs, because they should have found the barn, or they should have done this, that, or the other if it is connected to the same universe that we saw the previous 7 films. But I have to say, if you the very end, it brings back John. We get this idea that the pig farm is Jill Tuck's, obviously in John's family. Gives us more of an indication on where the whole pig mask thing comes in, without really heavily explaining it, which is something that Saul has always done in great detail. I mean, before this, the whole pig explanation was based off of, it was Gideon's birthday, which was the year of the pig, why they dressed up in pig masks when he kidnapped Cecil in the first place. This is just kind of further evidence, further proof that John took the pig for a legitimate reason that was connected to his family, connected to his past. Gives a lot of indication character on him. As I already mentioned, you have these people in the traps who are kind of connected to John, but some aren't. To me, that's really up in the air, and probably one of my biggest criticisms. I think you go one way or the other. It's fine to have maybe 1 or 2, but not 3, because then I'm expecting the other 2 to have some kind of connection as well, because that was a part of his character. You don't know me, but I know you. And then we learn through the more and more films coming out, we learn that Amanda was part of Jill's clinic, and so was Cecil, and so was a whole lot of other people who John tested throughout the entire series. So it was something that we kind of learned to expect. He does test people, but for his own reasons. But this being probably his second earliest trap chronologically in the series, it does seem like he has this vengeance problem, trying to get back on people who wronged him with Cecil and Anna, kind of, I guess you could say Anna, obviously Mitch, and also Logan. And so, yeah, I'm glad that they put the ending in there. I'm glad that they had that ad-libbed or even written line where Tobin's talking about, hey, you taught me this, you taught me to speak for the dead, you taught me to do this other stuff. Kind of a nice callback to where he was chronologically in Saw 6 when he was talking to William Easton. And it's like, you might think that the dead will have no claim over your soul, but you might be mistaken. It kind of flows into that. Lots of really good things that they brought up very quickly at the end to kind of put this entire film in perspective,
And I like some of the things at the ending with the story. Like, we didn't really touch on this at the beginning of the movie. We didn't touch on the opening of this film, which now Logan's motivation was Edgar Munson when Josiah's Black's character. Which, if you go back to the commentary, listen to the commentary again, go buy a DVD, listen to commentary. Josiah Black, who plays Edgar Munson's got a fascinating story about, how he got the part and how he was trying to get his role. So it's a pretty interesting listen right there. But I liked how it went back and the reveal of him actually be the one that shot Edgar Munson, which, you know, that's one of the things where Logan's going to be different, and each apprentice has their own flaw and had their own vice. Like Amanda's, we know her, so it's her emotion. Hoffman's, he just loved brutality, and now Logan's is just about vengeance. And I'm at the point right now where I really don't see Logan as a true follower or true apprentice, more of like a kind of like a vigilante. And because if we want to go into Logan's backstory, like if you go on to sawfreaks.com, there's a thing about article on there called Logan's History, and it's essentially the whole entire article that Halloran was looking at Logan during his whole time when he was in Fallujah, how Logan got his PTSD and how he was tortured by the Taliban and stuff like that, and how they use into that. But we're left with wondering, how long was he associated with John? When did he distance himself from John? Why was he not around at the ending and stuff like that? And we'll have to see what they do in the sequel for that. But for him, trying to connect him to be the guy working with John the whole time, and yet they did another thing where they try to convince you that, he's the new killer and stuff like that. And going back to what I said, I know I'm backtracking a lot, but going back to what I said in the our Star Wars review with Saw, where I said that George Lucas brought up the point where he likes to rhyme, not repeat. People kind of had the issues with this movie, like, oh, we just had another apprentice, oh, we just had another twist at the end. Where, yeah, it was kind of similar to the other films, but they kind of rhymed it in this one. And they kind of did Saw 4's twist, where they kind of rhymed the storyline, taking it past, but they didn't say that for the big twist towards the end, where you kind of suspect it. So yes, there was the same twist that Saw 4 in the timeline. There was the same twist where we got another apprentice helping the whole time, and we got another violent kill at the end and stuff like that. But they did enough to where, it was different. It was presented differently. You got a new character, you got a new cast, and I liked how it kind of rhymed other Saw films this ending, where, yeah, if you pay attention, you kind of could figure out it was Logan. And let me ask you this. At what point when you watched this movie, when did you know it was Logan?
I knew it was Logan, I think, by the time they got to the barn. And to me, that was really kind of just trying to push it out of my head. Like, it has to be Logan. It has to be Logan. It's like, no, don't tell yourself that. You can still get shocked. You can still get, you can still kind of walk out of this being shocked. And it's just hard to. I think 8 movies in, where you build your movies really on twists, you kind of see everything that they can give you. And even the producer said this in the commentary. It's like, we kind of have to tell you now because people are so perceptive, and then we have to try to convince you it's not that. It wasn't like that in the other films, or at least not that I can remember based on all my rewatching and the first time I saw them. I don't think that they were trying to tell you in Saw 4 that it was Hoffman. I don't think that they were trying to tell you that it was Amanda. It just kind of happened. You're like, oh yeah, I can see that. Of course, maybe my experience is different than some people listening to this, but with this one, it was like, okay, yeah, it's Logan. By the time he convinced Eleanor to go to the barn, and he had convinced Detective Hunt that it was Halloran, it's like, okay, yeah, this guy's pulling too many strings right now, and it just kind of feels like he's in total control, which is a definite Jigsaw thing to do. So, but I was still pleasantly surprised with everything. I still like the way that they portrayed it, and they ended it, and the way that they connected it and made him kind of the de facto very first apprentice, I guess you could say, and something that they have to do in the future. They might have to bring back Halloran to kind of wipe away some of the inconsistencies of this particular plan. Like you said, they could just blow up the barn. That would be interesting. But they can explore a little bit more of Matt Passmore's Logan's character, like his relationship with John. They can also kind of show us what happened to Eleanor's character. The last time we saw her, she had headlights on her. That can end up being something huge, or it could just be a generic, like, oh, someone picked her up and she went to the police office. And then obviously they're still looking for Halloran with Detective Hunt. So there's a lot of really interesting opened avenues that they can explore in the future of the sequels that I felt like it's really true. Even though they, like you said, they were kind of repeating or rhyming certain things that they had done in the past, they built this movie up to not only have a twist ending that for some people, for not some people, it's shocking, it's interesting, it's gory, and it also kind of feels like a bookend. It's not something like the previous franchise, like the last retrospective that we did, the last two really, where it feels like they didn't really end the story. It kind of feels a lot more in line with the original Saw films, where that door closes and it could just end there because you know how it's kind of pick up. You don't need to explore it anymore. You know who the new guy is. You know that he might continue. He might not. He doesn't have to. But whatever his grievance was, whatever he was trying to prove, he has succeeded in, and now we're just done with this particular story. So we could pick it up. We don't have to. And I think that's actually one of the better things about this movie, in my opinion.
Right. And the moment where maybe it's just me, because usually sometimes, murder mystery movies, they just set this up as like a thriller, where kind of like Seven or Usual Suspects, what they were trying to go for. The moment I knew it was Logan is whenever he took his shirt off and you saw his back. I figured, yep, he was in the saw blade trap for sure. And the moment I knew the timeline took place is the line where Eleanor and Logan were in the workshop, which to me, that's my favorite scene in the movie, other than scenes with Tobin, where the whole scene where we bring back Charlie's old music score of Baptism. We see Eleanor introduce all the traps and rebuild and stuff like that with her character, and how she's fascinated by John's works and stuff like that. And they do touch upon like a deleted scene that was shot but not filmed for the DVD. If you want to go back and listen to the commentary, they explain a little bit more on that. But the whole thing with I knew it was him, like when they brought the line where supposedly John Kramer developed this trap before, and they said none of John Kramer's victims ever died in this trap, and I knew, okay, this scheme's taking place in the past, obviously. And then the scene where Logan wakes up, takes his shirt off, and sees back, yep, that's Logan. Yep, for sure, it's him this time. But then again, I was impressed. Like, listen to the commentary, what like you and I brought up. They said, okay, we are going to present to you where, yes, it is Logan, but we're going to try to throw you off and get you to suspect somebody else's involvement as well. So as far as this movie goes, as far as murder mysteries goes, I give it like a B+ as far as my murder mystery things go. And like I said, I do appreciate the fact where they actually give you the clues early on that it's him, rather than like going back to Amanda and Hoffman, like we just said, just threw the twist in just for the sake of having a twist. And I think that's what those other two traps came in, where there was a twist just for the sake of having a twist. But this one, it made sense. And I like the fact that they gave you the clues early on, and they actually did callbacks. Like the first flashbacks, they brought up those 2 points in the flashbacks, and they brought the thing with him taking his shirt off and the saws, and it made sense. So I did like the fact, and I touched upon the ending. That's another thing too. This is the first time we actually see John kind of fail in one of his own tests, and that's one of the things I was intrigued whenever Logan didn't wake up and stuff like that, and John saves him, and he brought us like, John decided I shouldn't have to die over an honest mistake. The same honest mistake Logan made when he switched his X-rays. So that's kind of like an aha moment in John's character and in John's work, where, yes, I screwed up, I made a mistake, and then just the same as Logan made a mistake. Logan made the simple mistake of putting a wrong thing in the X-ray, and just because he did that and I did this to him on accident, he doesn't deserve to die. I made that mistake. And then he realized, John had this aha moment where, what am I doing? I shouldn't be targeting people, who done wrong to me. That it can't be done that way, because even Logan made the point, then there will be no true justice. But he says, John goes, but there will be, because we speak for the dead. And that's the whole point he was trying to teach Logan. Now, Logan may have taught John that lesson, which sets up the John Kramer Jigsaw character that we know and love. But then there's that flaw with Logan, where even 10 years later, after this lesson's learned by John, Logan does the exact opposite. And now he's out for one thing and one thing only: vengeance, because Edgar Munson killed his wife and Halloran was responsible for that. So I'm really intrigued with that ending, and it does set up like a vice for Logan. And I'm really, it's one of those things where Logan could be they have a chance for Matt Passport's character to be somewhat terrifying, because you have a PTSD war veteran who's very smart and logical and cunning and has plans. Well, he has flaws. We'll see how he fixes them in the sequel. But it's one of those things where, you're curious and you're set up, and the ending does kind of make that sense as far as the reveal goes. But we're just going to be tail along for the ride, and we're gonna see where we go next with it. But I'll go back to my top earlier. There would be no John Kramer, the Jigsaw character, without this Logan character.
No, I completely agree. I really like Matt Passmore's character way more, and Matt Passmore himself way more on repeat viewings. I tell anyone to go back and rewatch it if you haven't seen it since the very first time you saw it in theaters or something. If you were kind of a little not sold on his character, go back and rewatch it. Give him a second chance, because I think it's just like John, it's like the thing in the very first movie where you don't really have the character until you see it for a few times and you get to kind of mull it over and you get to realize, oh, this is what he's all about, and this is what I believe he had in his mind. Now, of course, it's debatable whether or not he has that PTSD. Of course, I agree. That's something that they should do. They could definitely jump on in future sequels. It's also debatable whether or not he's doing this for complete vengeance, as, he did judge Halloran, but he also allowed Halloran to make the right choice, and he cheated by making Logan go first, which that was, I think, Logan's only time of being complete John, like a John prodigy. Like, you just know what's gonna happen. I don't know if we knew Halloran enough to know he was that shady. Obviously he is, and they kept telling us, but that was to me, like, I would say a little bit of a cheat, but I would argue that they were already trying to promote it like that. Like, this guy is kind of a shady character. He's not someone you can really trust, so why would you? But I do like where they're going with his character, and I really see where they're going in the future if they do a sequel that's really kind of based off these characters and the events of this movie.